At this point, you have done quite a bit of work on identifying what problem you should solve, who you should solve it for, and you have a good idea about how you can solve it. When you arrive at this stage, a good sign that you're ready to move on is to see how crisp and specific your understanding of your users, their problem, and your solution is. If there are any parts that are still vague or too high level, you have to go back and fix them before moving forward, or you would be building on an unreliable foundation. Once everything is concrete enough, you're ready to move on to do a low cost and effort assessment of your solution. Now, let's get deeper into it. In order to have a deeper understanding of the risks involved in the product that you're building and to have a more targeted feedback from the user, you will go on to build various types of prototypes. This will help you identify any areas that might result in failure with much less effort and time investment by forcing you to think more critically about what you want to build. A prototype is also a very good artifact for collaboration between various team members within your own team or outside when you're communicating with users or stakeholders. It's also a very good way to provide the specifications to any teams that is not working closely with you. For example, we use prototypes often to provide UI specifications to our overseas contractors. There are various types of prototypes, and what you end up using is determined by what you think is the most important risk that you want to tackle up front. You already started your solution validation previously with a low fidelity mock-up of what you imagine your solution will look like. The purpose of that was to ensure that you understand the value that you are providing to the user. Another very common type of prototype is a high fidelity wireframe, or a variation of it, that you use to test if the user can actually understand and navigate the experience you're designing for them on their own. Next, there might be some specific aspects of the technology that you're hoping to use that are uncertain, and it would be good to do some quick and dirty coding to ensure those parts actually work. This can be building a very basic model, or ensuring the engineering parts fit together well, or that your data supports your problem statement. Then you want to build a live data prototype. The reason to do that is to ensure that you can actually do it and build the end-to-end version of your pipeline. But also importantly, you want to make sure that there is an early version of your solution available to your users so that they can play with it and provide critical data that you can use to improve your pipeline. Another extremely important test that you often have to do is creating a very scrappy version of your solution and see if anyone would purchase it. For instance, in the case of our farmer friends, you might actually go to their farm, take a bunch of pictures, analyze them, and provide a report, and see if the farmer is willing to pay to have access to reports like that on a monthly basis. This is not scalable, and not what you imagine your solution would look like, but a good way to see if somebody is actually willing to pay and how much, and if not, what needs to improve to convince them. As important as usability and viability tests are, given our short time, we are going to ignore them for the purposes of this workshop. As I mentioned, you already have played with the low fidelity mockups in week 1. In this week, you will be focusing on the feasibility prototype, and in week 3, you will be building a live data prototype. Now, let's take a closer look at all things that you have to take into account as you design and build your prototype. Obviously, data is the blood of your pipeline. Therefore, you need to have a good idea about what data you're going to use, how you can collect it, and how you can set it up for your pipeline. Next, the important task is to explore that data to ensure that it supports your problem statement. More specifically, you are still carrying some assumptions with you, some of which relate to your data, and this is your opportunity to invalidate the incorrect ones. Next, you want to build a base model. It is extremely important, and I can't emphasize it enough, that the goal is not to have the coolest model, but rather the simplest model to complete your pipeline. Remember, the goal is to just complete the pipeline, and you're not trying to get the best possible performance at the moment. In a lot of cases, this can be a rule-based system, or a simple stats method, or a very basic machine learning algorithm, like logistic regression. Next, you have to identify and set up tools that you need to build, package, and deploy your base model. These are things that you have hopefully learned through the MLOps videos already. Then you have to think about your delivery mechanism. Are you going to have a UI, or are you going to just expose an API endpoint? Finally, what kind of data are you going to collect, and how are you going to use that to improve your product? All of this is to answer the most critical question: have you solved the user's problem? In all likelihood, with your first attempt, you have not. But now you are in a position that you can ask the users for qualitative feedback, and even have automated feedback collection through their implicit or explicit interactions with your solution. This, as all other steps, is a very iterative process, and every time you get some feedback, you make it better, until you get to the point that you're actually solving the user's problem with the minimal machinery that is necessary. And that's when you declare an alpha release of your product. This is an important milestone, because for the first time you have practical evidence that you have created something that at least some users want. However, this is by no means the end of the story, only a short-term validation of your idea. In order to give you the rigor that is needed to plan and execute all of the steps above, use an artifact called architecture diagram. This is a diagram that will provide a high-level view of how all the components we talked about will fit into each other, from the start, from the data source, until to the very end where you're delivering the solution to the user. The architecture diagram is one of the deliverables for this week. The importance of doing it early is so that you can have a high-level understanding of what the end-to-end pipeline would look like, what tools will be involved, and importantly, what provisions you have to make to use them, including learning them or accessing them or setting them up. You can pause this video and have a closer look at the example that I'm showing, and you should be able to understand most of what's going on here based on the MLOps videos that you have watched. In addition to the architecture diagram, you also need to collect or access your initial data sources, explore it, and build the most basic model you can imagine. Importantly, you should document what assumptions you're planning to tackle throughout all this, and what data or feedback you need to address those assumptions. Other than your exploratory data analysis and building your base model to evaluate the technical feasibility of these parts of your pipeline, you won't be doing any coding just yet. Most of the activities here are planning for the next week, when you will implement the end-to-end pipeline and make it available to your users.